stories only God could write, true testimonies of faith, miracles, revelations, life-changing encounters, the missionary, and the power of God in action. Get ready to be moved, to be inspired, and to renew your hope and your faith.
Have you ever had a dream so vivid, so real, that it felt less like a figment of your sleeping mind and more like a direct instruction? A clear, undeniable mission whispered into the quiet of the night? I'm talking about the kind of revelation that shifts the ground beneath your feet and makes you question everything you thought you knew about faith. Because for Sarah, a missionary with a heart as vast as the Appalachian Mountains she called home, that's exactly what happened. It happened just before the sunrise painted the sky gold over Asheville, North Carolina, and it all centered on a man she had never met. Meet Sarah Jenkins. She's not a flashy televangelist. She's the kind of missionary who believes in the quiet, messy work of grace. For 20 years, she's dedicated her life to the outskirts of her community, the forgotten corners, the shelters, and the cold concrete sidewalks where hope goes to die. Sarah carries a palpable warmth, a gentle strength forged in 1,000 late nights comforting the brokenhearted. Her struggle? The quiet fear that she's missing the one person God truly needs her to reach. She dreams of a big mission field, but lately, God has been telling her to focus right here, on the very streets of Asheville. Her biggest fear is not failure, but mishearing the gentle voice of the Holy Spirit. The air in Asheville is usually crisp and sweet, scented with the last of the fall leaves, but outside the grand, stone facade of the Cornerstone Community Church, the air often carried a different, heavier scent. Stale smoke, unwashed despair, and the sharp, metallic tang of desperation. The homelessness crisis in the city, like in so many places, was reaching a breaking point. And the drug epidemic. It was a silent killer that wrapped its cold fingers around too many souls. Sarah's church had a vibrant ministry, but the problem was so vast, so overwhelming, that even her tireless efforts felt like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. She prayed daily for a miracle, a sign, a single, undeniable intervention. The night before, Sarah had the dream. It was simple yet profound. She was standing at the entrance of her own church, the place she knew like the back of her hand, and she saw a man. Not a specific person she knew, but a silhouette, shivering, hunched over, his face hidden by a worn, knit cap. And a voice clear as a bell spoke to her heart. He is waiting. Tell him of my love. I can change his life. She woke up, heart pounding, sweat on her brow. It was 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before the doors officially opened. Driven by a conviction that felt less like a choice and more like gravity, Sarah pulled on a thick coat and drove to the church. The first rays of morning light were just hitting the stained glass windows. And that's when she saw him, that he was sitting right on the bottom step of the church entrance, exactly where the silhouette in her dream had been. His name was Jake. Jake hadn't slept in 3 days. He had been wandering the streets since he fled the cold of a derelict encampment near the river. He was 29, looked 45, and his mind was a tormented landscape of craving and regret. For hours, an invisible, magnetic pull had drawn him to this spot. He didn't know why. He didn't believe in God, didn't believe in luck, and certainly didn't believe in miracles. But as the cold seeped into his bones, a sudden unfamiliar sensation, a deep, quiet lull in the storm of his addiction, washed over him. He felt, for the first time in years, a tiny, almost painful sliver of peace. It was this strange pull, this inexplicable urge, that kept him frozen on the steps of a building he had always avoided. Sarah parked her car. She grabbed a thermos of coffee and a still warm muffin, but her heart wasn't focused on the gifts. As she walked toward the entrance, every fiber of her being, every doubt, every fear dissolved. The Spirit's guidance was overwhelming. This was him. This was the man from the dream. She didn't need a booming voice from the sky. She felt God's love for this broken soul with a force that nearly brought her to her knees. She approached him slowly. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but firm, a soothing balm in the harsh morning air. Jake flinched, pulling his cap lower. He expected the usual. A hurried warning, a judgmental glare, or a cold handout. Sarah didn't offer the coffee first. She sat a few steps away, keeping a respectful distance, and looked not at him, but into him, into the wounded, frightened boy hidden beneath the grime. "Jake," she said. Using the name she somehow knew. He froze. He hadn't spoken his name to anyone in weeks. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes bloodshot and hollow, meeting hers. Sarah's eyes filled with sudden, powerful tears, not of sorrow, but of an immense divine love she felt pouring through her. "Jake," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. "I know you don't know me, but I have a message for you. You felt a pull to this place, didn't you? Something brought you here, didn't you? It wasn't the cold. It was the only one who can truly melt it away." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a powerful whisper, the words burning with conviction. "Jake, God loves you. And He sent me to tell you that this is the day your life changes. He sees the man you were created to be, and He sent me with an instruction to tell you. Give up the drugs. Right here. Right now. At the entrance to his house." Jake stared, his breathing ragged. The sliver of peace he'd felt now battling a hurricane of fear, hope, and blinding confusion. He looked at the gentle missionary, then down at the small, crumpled packet of white powder in his palm. The last of his stash, the one thing he felt he couldn't live without, the only thing he thought kept him alive. Give it up. Right now? His entire world was tipping on its axis, and the cold, hard steps of the Cornerstone Community Church suddenly felt like the edge of a cliff. What would he choose? The quick oblivion of the packet, or the terrifying, impossible leap of faith? The silence on the steps of Cornerstone Community Church stretched, heavy and absolute, broken only by the chirping of a few persistent sparrows. For Jake, it wasn't a silence, it was a battle cry. He saw the packet in his hand, a tiny white coffin containing his immediate relief and his slow death. He saw Sarah, her face streaming with tears that were not for herself, but for him. You know my name," he finally croaked, his voice unused and raw. "How did you know my name?" Sarah didn't flinch. "I told you, Jake. He sent me. He knows your name. He knew you'd be here. He knows the dreams you gave up on, the pain that drove you here. He saw you when no one else did." Then the strangest thing happened. The overwhelming, magnetic pull that had brought him to the church steps intensified, not as a command, but as a pure, unconditional acceptance. He looked at the white packet. It suddenly felt like trash. It felt like a lie. With a shaking hand, Jake dropped the packet. It hit the stone step with a quiet, final thud. Then he did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He wept. He didn't just cry. He released a decade of shame, pain, and self-hatred. Sarah didn't rush him. She simply moved closer, placing a hand on his back. "Welcome home, Jake," she whispered. The commitment, however, was just the start. Sarah took him inside, not to a sterile office, but to the church's tiny, warm kitchen. She offered him the coffee and muffin, which he devoured with a gratitude that went beyond hunger. But her first and most crucial action was connecting him with Pastor Thomas, a man who ran a small, dedicated addiction recovery program called The Bridge in the heart of the Asheville community. The next few days were a blur of raw, painful transformation. Jake moved into a small, temporary room at the Bridge Community Center, a place filled with the ghosts of his old life, but also the promise of a new one. The physical withdrawal was brutal. Every muscle ached, his mind screamed for the comfort of the drug, and despair was a shadow that constantly clung to him. One afternoon, Jake found himself staring into the mirror in his tiny room. He saw the haggard face, the vacant eyes. An old habit, a toxic reflex, told him to run. But he remembered Sarah's tear-filled eyes, the depth of her belief. He grabbed a small laminated card the ministry gave him, a simple verse. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in Him, and I am helped." He read it aloud, his voice cracking. It was a small act, but in that moment, it was a gigantic, deliberate turn away from the darkness that he started helping out in the community center kitchen, peeling potatoes for the nightly meal. His hands were clumsy, his concentration weak. He overheard a cynical comment from another man. Another one who thinks a prayer is gonna fix a decade of bad choices. Jake felt the familiar surge of shame and anger. But instead of throwing the knife down and walking out, he took a deep breath. "Maybe not the prayer," he said softly, looking at the man, "but the love that sent the missionary to the church steps, that's already fixed the choice to stay lost." As the fog of withdrawal slowly lifted, the memories began to rush in. The truth of what he had lost. He wasn't always Jake the homeless man. He had been a promising young carpentry student at Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College, a son with a loving, though complicated, mother, a man who loved hiking the Blue Ridge Parkway. The downward spiral had begun with a job injury, a prescription painkiller, and a subsequent, crushing layoff. The addiction didn't just steal his money and his home. It stole his dignity and his ability to dream. One night, lying awake, he remembered his father, who had passed away years ago. His father, a quiet man, had once given him an old, worn Bible. Jake hadn't thought about it in years. Now, in the quiet of his room, he felt a crushing wave of grief, not just for his dad, but for the son his dad had lost. He finally understood the emotional depth of Sarah's encounter. It wasn't about saving him from the drug. It was about reclaiming the self he had buried. Slowly, the signs of hope emerged. Jake started showing up early for group counseling. He began walking with a slightly straighter spine. The hollowness in his eyes gave way to a hesitant, guarded light. Pastor Thomas noticed that Jake had a gift with wood. He could look at a broken chair or a wobbly table at the community center and instinctively know how to fix it. He was given a small task: restoring the worn-out altar rail in the church chapel. The work was painstaking, requiring focus and patience, the very things addiction had stolen. As he sanded and polished the dark wood, it became his meditation, his quiet offering. About 3 weeks into his recovery, Jake felt strong enough to step back onto the church steps where it all began. He wanted to feel the cold stone, to remind himself of the choice he had made. As he stood there, watching the town bustle around him, a new black sedan pulled up. A woman stepped out. She was older than Sarah, impeccably dressed, but her face was etched with a deep, permanent sadness. She carried a small, leather-bound purse and looked utterly lost. She walked directly up to Sarah, who was just arriving, and spoke in a tight, formal voice. "Excuse me, are you with the church? I'm looking for the missionary, Sarah Jenkins. I came all the way from Tennessee. I heard she helped a young man recently, a homeless man." Sarah, recognizing the pain in the woman's eyes, nodded gently. "I am Sarah. How can I help you?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. She didn't look at Jake, who was standing quietly just a few feet away, holding a small wooden carving he'd finished. She pulled a worn photograph from her purse, a picture of a smiling young man, graduating from high school. "I'm his mother," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "My son. His name is Jake. I thought he was gone forever. Please, Miss Jenkins. Do you know where my son is?" The air thickened, a palpable energy flowing from the mother to the son, who stood frozen in a moment of agonizing clarity. The revelation wasn't a secret about his past, but the profound truth of his present, that his mother had never stopped looking for him, never stopped hoping. Sarah looked from the photo in the mother's hand to the man standing before her. She saw not just a prodigal son, but a miracle in progress. She took a breath, a silent prayer of gratitude to the God who orchestrated this divine meeting. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, "it is an absolute honor to meet you. And your son." She turned and placed a hand gently on Jake's shoulder, guiding him forward. "Your son isn't lost anymore. He is right here." The mother, Catherine, looked up, her gaze sweeping over the man whose face was thinner, older, but whose eyes were startlingly, unmistakably his. She gasped, dropping the photo. "Jake?" she whispered, the name a plea, a question, and a prayer all at once. Jake could only nod. The weight of his guilt, the shame of his choices, came crashing down. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, and in every version he ran. But now, anchored by the strength he had found on these very steps, he stood his ground. The reunion was not a moment of instant, Hollywood joy. It was a release of 10 years of agony. Catherine rushed forward, not with anger or judgment, but with a desperate, all-encompassing hug. She clung to him, sobbing into his worn coat. "My baby," she choked out. I thought you were gone." Jake, who hadn't felt true human touch in so long, buried his face in her hair. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm clean. I'm trying. I'm here." Sarah stood back, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. This was the miracle. Not just the healing of the addiction, but the restoration of the family, the deepest wound of all. It was proof that God's love isn't just a concept. It's a profound, active force of reunion. Later that day, in the quiet of the small chapel, Jake showed his mother the altar rail he had restored. The wood gleamed, polished back to a rich mahogany. "This is you, Mom," Jake said, tracing the grain with his finger. "Scraped down to the raw wood. Imperfect but solid. And now polished. Restored." Catherine simply held his hand. "When you disappeared, Jake, a piece of my heart disappeared too. I've been praying for a sign, for someone to find you. You were led to the church, but God was answering my prayers too." In the weeks that followed, Jake's recovery solidified. The reunion with his mother became the fuel for his transformation. She didn't try to whisk him away. She supported him at the bridge, becoming an active part of the recovery community. She brought him his old tools, a reminder of the carpenter he used to be. Jake realized that the missionary's simple instruction, "Give up the drugs. Right here, right now," was the key to everything. It wasn't about a multi-step program. It was about an instantaneous, defiant surrender to a higher power. It was about choosing life over death. In the very place where God had manifested his presence, he became a beacon at the bridge, mentoring the newcomers. He was the living, breathing proof that the love of God is immediate, personal, and absolutely powerful. The hollow-eyed addict was gone, replaced by a man with purpose, hands rough with work, and a heart overflowing with gratitude. Sarah, watching him from afar, realized the dream was not about her being a superhero. It was about her simply being obedient to a quiet, specific instruction. God didn't need her eloquence. He just needed her availability. The greatest mission field, she learned, was often right in front of the church entrance. A year later, Jake stood on the church steps, not as a broken man seeking relief, but as the newly appointed facility manager and vocational mentor for the Bridge community. He was clean, strong, and walking in his purpose. The Cornerstone Community Church had become more than a building. It was the sacred ground of his second chance. Every morning, he stood on those steps and looked at the Blue Ridge Mountains, a reminder that even the biggest, most immovable problems can be overcome by the power of faith. He looked at the world with the gentle, knowing eyes of a man who had faced death and chosen life. The love of God, delivered in a simple morning exchange, had restored his soul and his family. The missionary had done her part, and the miracle was complete. What is the one thing God is asking you to surrender, to leave at the entrance to your heart, so your own miracle can begin? Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next powerful story of faith and transformation.